Good morning. This is Anthony Parrott of IRSMedic. Thank you. Welcome to joining us today. Today's Monday, July 22nd, and today we're going to be discussing a topic that came up in a discussion, and we're going to be talking about when not to use the Streamlined Disclosure Program. I am a tax attorney myself, and I've helped probably thousands of people get through the Streamlined program, but it's actually not for everybody, and it takes a careful analysis. And joining me today is longtime friend Keith Redmond and John Richardson. Keith is going to start us off with his introduction about exactly how this topic came about. Keith, what happened here? What was your beef? You were having a beef with somebody?
Yeah, well, just to step back real quick is that, I was speaking with one of my clients and going over the different options. And one of the options was possibly entering the Streamline program. And after having a discussion with you, based on the information that the person shared, it looked like that it would not be in her best interest to actually enter the Streamline
Right.
program. So it got me thinking. And so I put up a message or a posting in the American Expatriates Group for Residency-Based Taxation to that effect that, you need to take a look, is the Streamline program for you or not? It's not always the case.
Right.
And we had a tax compliance individual push back and say, no, that's not correct. The Streamline program is the way to go, and there is no downside to it. And
Yeah.
that's the avenue. So that's
All
the
right.
genesis of this podcast, to talk about when is it appropriate and when is it not.
Fantastic. All right, great. Well, with us is the great John Richardson today, and John has created some slides for us as he normally does. So let's get to the slides. We don't have a ton of time, so we're going to get into this. Now, and I would just say here, I could start off one time. I'm going to give. My name is Anthony Parent, by the way. I am the founder of IRSMedic. I am partner at Fithey and Partners. And I'm going to just one example of where right away to giving answer right away. If you are renouncing your citizenship, okay, and this is an example of where you don't want to use a streamlined program, and there's a reason why. If you're renouncing your citizenship and you haven't filed tax returns at all, okay, you need to certify 5 years of compliance on your form 8854. Okay. Well, you might want to certify those 5 years of compliance outside of the Streamline program. The reason being that is if you use the Streamline program and you haven't filed, and you do happen to have a controlled foreign corporation, you have to watch out for that transition tax. If you file a Streamline disclosure right now today, you have to include your transition tax from 2018, even though it's more than 5 years ago. So there's an example right now of why maybe you don't want to use the Streamline program, because there would be a transition tax to pay in order to get your 5 years of compliance. Now, of course, if you renounce, there's a risk that you would be the IRS would examine you for penalties that you could be exposed to, but you're no longer a U.S. person with no longer any more ties to the U.S. Maybe it's not the biggest concern in the world to be not in compliance. And so there's an example right there. The first example I could think of where maybe, nope, not so quick. Let's not look into that. So let's not jump into that so quickly, because you could be. And this is the thing, that the Supreme Court has upheld this transition tax recently. And so by following the standard advice, you could actually end up with a terrible, terrible tax bill that you actually probably didn't necessarily have to pay. So now let's get into it. So there's one right there. All right, John. So I hope, John, you're warmed up for your presentation here. Now, first thing you have here is a warning here that this presentation is not for green card holders inside and outside the U.S., because there are a lot of different there's other things to consider there, but rather and this is really, and here we're just talking about there's a domestic streamline program for those inside the U.S., and we're not speaking about that today. We're talking today about those who live overseas. Okay, that's what we're talking about today. Other issues involving that, we might need a separate one, a separate podcast on that to discuss those issues. Okay, John. So here's sort of the problem that we have, right?
Okay. So, we just, before going through this, like this whole discussion has gotten so perverted over the years, so that, it's as though words like streamlined equal compliance, for example. I think we really should take a step back.
Right. Yeah.
And, for better or worse, right, wrong, the Internal Revenue Code contains a bunch of rules, supported by regulations. And, the idea is that you're supposed to be in compliance with those rules, be they filing taxes, forms, what have you. And that's what the law is, right? So the starting point on this really should be that this takes place in the context of an objective of complying with the law, okay? Which means simply that streamlined is one of a number of ways of complying with the law, right? Now,
Right. That's right. Yep.
not written down in the Internal Revenue Code. It's what you, Anthony, generally refer to, I think, as HTML or something like that. What it is, it's a program that the IRS put together, which is sort of an agreement in advance, if you will, provided that you meet the conditions that your compliance requirements will be deemed to have been satisfied, right? So in other words, it's one way of achieving it. Of course, there's nothing to stop you just from complying with the law either. File the stuff right outside Streamlined, right? So I think that's the first point here, and I share the sentiments of the two of you that I think that Streamlined is overused. I think that it has certain advantages that I'll get to, but I think it also has a lot of, has certain disadvantages. And my personal view of this, which has sort of evolved over the years, is that streamlined when necessary, but not necessarily streamlined. Okay. And you can write that one down.
Yeah. It's
And there are a lot of disadvantages to streamline, not the least of which is, you're required to write a statement of non-willfulness, which theoretically, I think can come back and hurt you. You're committing to certain things in writing that may not be interpreted down the road in the way.
well, yeah. John, and one of those too is because I review streamlines all the time, and I see them done incorrectly. Then I'm reading the statement to say, "Hey, I'm really making sure I'm taking care of my non-compliance here," and I'm reading, I'm looking at the return that's loaded with errors, and so you really want to make sure when you certify that actually is what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah, I would be very. Again, I am not a tax preparer, right? So, but I sort of deal with people who do eventually end up in Streamlined in that, and I've written a lot, help people write a lot of non-willful statements. The reason I put it that way is because it is their statement,
Yeah.
okay, etc. But do you really think it's in your interest to write the IRS a letter, for them to keep on file? I don't know. But anyway, there are reasons when it's good. There are reasons when it's not so good. Now, this whole compliance discussion, and we'll pick up the speed in a second, but I think we've been talking. I've either been talking about this recently with you or with somebody else, but I feel like this has been the week of talking about compliance issues with people. And
Shark Week was the week before. Yes, you're correct.
dealing with people generally who are not in compliance, and people have very, very different circumstances in very different countries. And I really think the starting point, which is where this slide is, that you've got to find an advisor who essentially will make the decision of what the components of what you file are, right? What are the forms that might require to, why are you complying at all, right? I mean, do you want to set up so you have foreign tax credits? I mean, there's a lot of stuff. So you need to find somebody who's willing to take the time to really understand your situation, because last week I remember we had a slide of 50 shades of tax residency. I think maybe today we should we should have a slide. Maybe there is one, 50 shades of compliance. Depending on what it is you're trying.
And I think that is, that's kind of a point. That's a pretty good point about what we do mean by compliance, John. So and I do want to thank you for kind of grounding us in reality that, the law requires us to comply with it, whether we like to or not. And there's many ways to comply with the law. And I
That's
think what
right.
and one of the things too is my suspicion. Believe it or not, over the years I've got suspicious of our government. One of the reasons why I've got suspicious of our government is back in 2011. The IRS had one flavor of disclosure. It was the
Yeah.
2009 OVDI. One flavor, right? And a lot of people are and the IRS recruited me as one of their top agents, I suppose, because I was out there telling everybody to say you better comply using this program, otherwise the disaster is going to happen to you. And at the time there's a huge dispute over whether or not people should do quiet or so-called soft disclosures outside the program, get into compliance, but not subject themselves to the horrific penalty regime. And the IRS in 2011 had a press release out there to say, you know what, we've identified 10,000 taxpayers who made soft disclosures. We've identified these 10,000 and we're going to come after them with everything we have. We are going to make their lives miserable. They're not going to be able to escape what we have. They think they can get out of the program. Oh, no, 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 no. Well, guess what happened? Guess what happened? No, they went after like two. They went after two. We happen to know one of them. He was a retired guy and didn't even know his tax professional made a soft disclosure on his part. And in fact, the IRS never ever had that campaign to ruin people as they claimed they were going to do. So that really alerted my suspicions to say, well, IRS, you told me you were going to do this. And you had me out there, reciting what you were going to say. But I'll be honest, a lot of people who didn't follow my advice, they might have ended up better. They may have ended up better. And so it's really something that, where you need to separate the IRS's press release needs, their bark from their bite. And that's really, I think that's one of the prime jobs of your attorney is to understand where the IRS is BSing. That's really the number one thing, where they're actually lying right to us, which they do. And that's
Yeah.
really one of the things of why Keith, and you probably kind of have some stories on that, right?
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I stopped. I mean, at that time, I stopped a number of people from even entering the OV. I always get the initials mixed up, the
Yeah.
OVD whatever program. Saved them a lot of money.
Yeah.
There was no reason for them. And last point, and I'll just be quiet on this one. And one individual was an accidental American who went to one of the top law firms globally, and they were going to enter him into the program. And
Yeah.
I told them to stop, and I
Yeah.
saved him about $50,000.
Oh, yeah, small and right. So that's something that that's something, the IRS is not our partner in compliance. Okay. I don't think that's not what we can say. It's a game. And they're trying to get as much from you and to terrorize you as much as possible. So that's what we need to be, that's what we need to be mindful of. That's really the thing that we need to be, cognizant of, is that the IRS is not our friend. They're adverse to us, and they're in many cases intentionally confusing. So sorting through everything to get through this, and not just blindly saying, "Oh, the IRS says to do this, we better do that." No, you better start thinking. That's what you need to do. All right, John. So
Yeah, I actually have a slightly alternate view on that thing in 2011. I remember, like anybody who's been around through that press release, but I don't think the compliance industry was interpreting it properly. That press release was in the context of a meeting, and a question that was asked that my recollection was clearly responding to the issue of resident Americans and not Americans abroad. And I think that the compliance industry generally, be they accountants, lawyers, whatever, didn't take the time to understand the context and caused a lot of problems. But look, where this discussion the last couple minutes leads to is this: that if you think for a minute that by calling up somebody who files taxes that you can get good advice on how to solve compliance problems, you're absolutely delusional. Okay, you are delusional. You've got to pick and choose your advisors carefully. And at one point, I felt so strongly about this that I even suggested that people separate the advisor from the tax preparer. Right? In other words, that you find one person to objectively make a decision in terms of what should be filed, and another okay, in terms of actually filing them. I mean, a benign example of that is the whole 3520 issue, right?
Mm.
Recently. But anyway, look, back to compliance problems generally. They can be future or past. Future, basically that means just filing going forward. Now, I'm not recommending or not recommending. I'm just talking about logical options here. But the fact that you haven't been in compliance in the past, usually in the case of Americans abroad, because they had no reason to think they should be in compliance. Even today, I mean, yesterday I was getting a bunch of emails from somebody, just heard about this, right? Even today, I mean, you may want to consider whether you should just, obey the law, right? Start filing, et cetera, without getting into, a bunch of stuff in the past, unless somebody pressures you to do that. So future compliance means, how am I going to comply in the future? And by the way, the relief procedures for former citizens would be one example. Past compliance,
Right.
understand what past compliance is, okay, and why it's different. So past compliance is a desire on your part to amend, change things, or file in the past when you did, right? And that's a different kind of thing. You need a conversation with somebody about that. Okay, next. I'm picking up the speed here a little bit. I mean,
All right. Yeah.
so, again, I work very significantly in the area of expatriation, and there's a lot of people who never filed. And for many reasons, the 2009 relief procedures are way better than streamlined. Okay, I don't think we have time to get into that today, but that's another option right there. For a lot of people.
Yep.
But anyway, continuing on. Okay, I even put that in, right? Separate the
Yeah.
person who's, deciding what you need to do with who's actually doing it. But you have to have somebody who's willing to have a conversation with you. I mean, you send somebody an email, hi, I'm not in compliance, and they respond with, well, I'll do a streamline with you for this amount of money. I mean, there's quite a few gaps, right, in that communication. Next.
Yeah, John, and you're thinking about sort of how my practice has evolved too, because you know, this is sort of how cases work with us now. It's we spend hours going over whatever the right strategy is going to be. We think we have it, and when something comes up, okay, maybe we should do this instead. It used to be before, we would determine, oh, Streamline's right for you, very quickly. Now we're really taking much more time, and then once we decide what we're going to do, it goes a lot quicker. So we spend a lot of time on the deliberation because there's so many moving parts, and we add in the additional moving part of a part of an intentional renunciation. A huge life change. I mean, that's a huge sea change, and the decision whether or not to stay a U.S. person will impact what our disclosure strategy is going to be. So again, I just finished up. I think it was 6 months. It was 6 months with a couple who was thinking of renouncing. We went through over the whole strategy. You know what? It didn't make sense. So now that changes what our streamlined policy is going to be. So I would say this is really key. You have to get through every little detail because there's consequences to pieces. You really do have to spend that incredible amount of time to get to the decision. Thank you, John. Thank you.
Yeah, and of course, one thing I would add into that, sometimes it's the simplest things that elude, advisors, right? Or, people who think about this stuff in a sophisticated way. I think it's often a good idea to first do the tax returns and see what they look like.
There you go. That's what we do.
That drive this stuff to a very large degree. In other words, I wouldn't get too like this whole discussion. In a way, I think is kind of weird. Like talking about streamlined in the abstract. I mean, okay, it's one morning we can do this, but it doesn't make any sense in the abstract, right? I mean, it makes sense only in the context of your individual circumstances. But anyway, moving on.
Well, you just said something very important there, John, that it depends on the individual circumstances. And I think a lot of people think that the Streamline is the go-to program.
They think it equals compliance. They don't understand that it's just a mechanism to comply with the law. with sort of an advance, and it has its benefits. We'll get to them in a minute. Sort of an advance agreement from the IRS, they'll be treated in a certain way. But the next key general point before we get into the only thing people will probably listen to, is this, that this is not okay. When people get into this issue knocks on their door in life, um, they leave out they leave out the most important part of the equation, and
Right.
that's them.
Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
that's them. Now the first point is this: is that there's no denying that for many people, less so now because there's a lot more mainstream knowledge about this, but go back 10, 12 years ago where they learn about this. It's one of the most emotionally destabilizing things in their lives ever,
Ever.
particularly if they see themselves as tax compliant people in the country where they live. So the first thing is, and this needs to be acknowledged up front, is there's a huge emotional component to this kind of decision.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah, and basically you have to pick a solution that you can live with, in the sense that, there's two sort of extremes, okay, on the emotional continuum. The first is unbelievable rage and anger,
Mm.
okay, which is entirely reasonable.
Reasonable. It's reasonable rage and anger. There we go. How about that? Yeah.
And the second is incapacitating fear because of all the misinformation.
Yeah.
So whatever you do, you need to come down sort of in the middle, where you're not completely dominated going forward by one emotion or the other. Because remember, this is really about life planning and just putting a horrible thing in your life behind you. And you're not going to be able to put it behind you if you keep thinking about it and second guessing yourself, right? So a lot of this is, what can I live with? Okay, emotionally. I should have added financially as well, because of the cost. But then practically, a lot of people in my experience, you know, focus on, oh my God, I've got to solve my compliance problem, kind of forgetting that, that problem is going to continue as long as they're an American citizen.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you have to file returns in a way that you can maintain the filing of the returns.
Yeah.
Okay, that's another thing. So I think a question that you need to ask yourself is, am I able to actually continue doing this? And one of the issues here, for those who don't understand that, one of the issues is just straight financial cost. I mean, what we're talking about is, some people might say, well, John, this is the Rolls Royce version of this. Well, no, it's what it's really about. It's just that most people can't afford financially what's really required to do this properly, right? Which is one reason why people renounce, because there's just no way for them to deal with the system. But anyway, that's some background. This is about you as an individual every bit as much, and I think more than it is with your tax preparer, somehow appeasing the IRS. Okay, so next.
Yeah, John, and I'm just going to put this up here because this, we're going to recount our steps here. Number one, when renouncing may not be needed, there's transition tax exposure that you're gonna renounce. Okay. Number two, we got to think about this: is continuing compliance possible, likely? And I've seen it. People, oh yeah, hey, I'm out of compliance. Oh, okay, what happened? Haven't been filing. Okay. And then I find out, oh, you did a streamlined disclosure before, and then you stop filing. Okay, well, why do you want to do this again? You're not going to be filing. So something you need to understand is, are you going to be able to keep up with the cost of it? And so there's a cost to the compliance, depending on it. So that's absolutely true. You might not want to be doing it if you're not going to be able to stay in compliance. You're better off with nothing, and that's really the thing. You're better off with nothing as opposed to some compliance for some year, which alerts the IRS to your existence. Great. And now they know everything you have. And then for 1 year, it magically went away. Oh, what's that all about? And I would say this too, when I think about the streamlined disclosure processes, what I look at them as a predetermined penalty abatement, basically. That's really why you're doing the streamlined program, because I have very, very few. By the way, I do represent people with criminal exposure, actual criminal exposure. It does happen. But very, very few of our streamlined clients, it's something that would they ever really need to consider. Most people aren't in, they're not breaking the law, because what is the law? A jury would never even understand what the law is. How could the U.S. Treasury how could the Department of Justice bring a criminal tax evasion case against a U.S. person claiming, citizenship-based taxation, and they're trying to impose these crazy things like, what's a 5471? Yeah, you lost the jury, so it's not going to happen. So again, people don't have it's not the original disclosure programs were for people with actual criminal exposure, and they actually did it. They did it, and they took conscious steps to engage a firm to commit tax evasion on their part. And that's a vastly different story than the condition of the 9 million Americans overseas and a lot of immigrants. That's not at all part of it. So really, why you're filing a streamline is to limit your penalty exposure. That's really what it comes down to. All right, move on here. All right.
Compliance problem.
There it is. Yeah.
Compliance problems are different from tax problems, right? Right now, you have a compliance problem. Once you enter the tax system,
Right.
then you'll have a tax problem. Okay.
Yeah.
There's lots of problems ahead of you.
Yeah.
What a compliance problem is, it's just a failure to meet the requirements of the Internal Revenue Code. I mean, you have not filed, you've omitted income, you haven't filed various returns. I mean, there are some examples. Okay.
It's not like you to have a technical error there, John. It's not like for that.
Sorry?
Well, it's a failure to meet the requirements of the Internal Revenue Code and certain sections of Title 31.
Oh, I mean, almost nobody's can be compliant with this stuff. Okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
The point here is this, I think in part, you want to fix this stuff. Maybe you use an existing program. Maybe you just fix it and file. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll go through some examples, but next year. Okay. Yeah. All right. So I just said that a minute ago. I don't have anything.
Yeah. Nothing more. Yep.
What I'd like to emphasize here is that one of the things you need to work with on an advisory, so you're out of compliance. Sometimes out of compliance means no penalty exposure at all. You just file. Sometimes it can mean large penalty exposure, particularly in information returns. But that's something you need to determine very early on, because that's a major driver of what you might do. And streamlined, as you point out, Anthony, is a good way to limit penalty exposure, to limit penalties. Yeah. But anyway, continuing on here. I don't know if you can read that. This is just to emphasize that there are different kinds of ways of solving problems, even within the IRS. They have FBAR delinquent procedures, if that's the issue. They have international information delinquent. I mean,
DIRF. We call it the DIRF, the Delinquent Informational Reporting Form.
But here's the thing, okay? You can't just call up anybody. You need to find somebody who's got some experience with dealing with this kind of, with the 50 shades of non-compliance. Anyway, next. Now, there are necessary conditions to use streamlined. And in a way, they're the good news and the bad news. Okay, now here's the first one that is very clear to me a lot of tax preparers don't understand. And that is that you're eligible for streamline only if you fail to report gross income from a foreign financial asset and pay tax, right? All right. Now, at a minimum, all right, that means that there has to be an omission from income from a non-U.S. bank account, right, or something or other. Okay, you can't just use streamlined as a way to get information returns in. Et cetera. Next.
Oh, you know what? Right. That John, I just got to back up here because you're bringing up a really good point here that you just don't. And this is what happens a ton of time. I see people come in for a second opinion. Now, oftentimes it is when it's not someone overseas, because overseas there's no penalty associated. But if you're using the streamlined program domestically because you live in the U.S., there is a 5% penalty that pops up. So one of the key objectives that we have is for our clients to pay as little to the IRS as possible. So we really investigate to say, well, did you not report gross income from this account that you did not have an FBAR on? Well, no, I didn't report it. I understand you didn't report it, but I want to know, was there income associated with the unreported account? Why do you want to know? It's like, because we can just we don't need to do a streamlined disclosure on that account. We can just submit the delinquent FBARs, not have to pay anything. So that can be a huge savings. Again, I see it more likely in with our clients inside the U.S. as that 5% penalty isn't necessarily, it isn't there for those who live overseas. And so I think what happens is people are like, well, let me just be safer than sorry. I'll do the streamlined program. Even though it might not have affected it, but again, you might not want to do that. There's reasons why.
So Anthony, there's so many differences between the streamlined domestic and the streamlined offshore. That's why at the beginning I said I don't want to talk.
And I talked about it. Sorry.
No, I mean fine, but just for listeners here, okay. Yeah. The differences are so large that I don't even think they should be called the same program. Okay, they're so large.
Yeah. Huh. Good point.
Remember, I think I'm right. Okay, on the not only is there the 5%, right, but I think you also have had to have filed returns, etc.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. But anyway, let's continue on. The next thing is you have to have lived outside the U.S. for one of the last 3 years, according to their definition. Now, I think I'm right in saying, okay, but I didn't get down the road too much on this when I put this together. And this actually opens the door to moving back to the United States and immediately doing an offshore streamline, even if you're in the United States, right? Because you meet the test of one of the 3 years, and that can be helpful.
Yeah,
I think for some people. You have to file 3 years of 1040s. You can file more, and 6 years of FBARs, depending on how people feel about that. But you also have to meet the test of non-willful conduct. Now, we could do a separate thing on what non-willful means, but the point I want to make here is that it has its own separate definition under Streamlined. Okay, it has nothing to do with definitions of willfulness in a criminal context or anything. And the definition is due to negligence, inadvertence, or mistake or conduct that's the result of a good faith misunderstanding of the requirements of the law. And that is very wide. Okay, it is very, very wide. But those are
the and I think John, an updated non-willful podcast would be good, because I have a lot of things to think about there. About
we can do that. But again, okay. So to use Keith's phrase, the reality on the ground. All right, so let's back up. Most of these non-willful statements are done very, very poorly. Okay, they don't follow the directions. They're beyond stupid. Most times, it doesn't seem to matter. Most times, okay, but this is the type of thing that I think can get you into trouble. And my personal view of this is that the non-willfulness statement is perhaps a reason to not automatically jump into Streamlined. I mean, do you really want a love letter to the IRS in your file? I don't know. Next, those are the conditions. Now, so, Anthony covered this. Streamlined strategy for those of unreported income from foreign finance. You have to have that anyway. So what would that mean? I mean, that would mean something as simple as, I hear people in Canada, didn't report the income from their TFSA, and that's a very simple and benign example. For people who face significant information return penalties, the argument for Streamline is very strong. I mean, maybe you even want to wait a year and not report some income to be eligible for it. I don't know.
That right. I mean, there's really, wow, you're really getting my gears going about how complicated this actually is to get into as I go through, discuss these issues and why it takes so much time. And that's what I would say is I think, first off, that don't just call some, and I think this is the problem that people have, is they're expecting their tax professional to actually be as concerned with it as they are, and they're just going to sell them a Streamline. Oh, here's our Streamline package. That's what you do. That's what you do. What do you mean? Here, this is what it is. And there's so much going on here with this. And one of the things that triggers it too is because, again, look, we're not worried about taxes. we're not worried about taxes. That's not our concern, because the taxes are often not that terrible because of foreign tax credits or foreign income exclusion, whatever the case may be. The taxes aren't usually that awful for our clients who tend to live in high tax jurisdictions. It's these ruinous possible potential FBAR, all these reporting form penalties. And as we get into a lot of these things, we find, you know what, this penalty may not be, you might not be subject to this penalty because you don't have this form requirement, or that this treaty says you don't need to report this income. Therefore, we could just now do a delinquent. We don't need to do a streamline. So things go on so much. And it's actually, one thing, and I would say it is a country by country basis too. We're talking about individual by individual. It is also a country by country basis, because your answer will be, your answer, whether or not you should do it, can depend. Facts all similar, but a country of residence can determine, okay, actually we'll do a delinquent return only, we'll do a streamlined, or maybe nothing at all. Your country of residence will determine that. Absolutely.
Well, again, all of this comes back to, I think my first point is that, you need to find somebody, an advisor who you trust, who's willing to think this through with you.
Yeah.
Okay. You can't, but anyway, next.
Yeah, no, that is what we've been doing, by the way. So I'm happy we have been, because it's like now it makes sense why our process developed this way, because it makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so streamlined is not attractive. So obviously, if you don't have unreported income, not comfortable certifying non-willfulness, or if you don't face information,
There we go. Right? Yeah.
If you don't face penalties, I would give serious consideration to not entering streamline. Maybe just file returns if you want, whatever. But it's not. This is more of an art than a science, I think. Right? Anyway, next.
Totally.
Other options for addressing past. Okay, so again, nobody tells you have to use streamline. Maybe you just file or amend your returns. I mean, I've seen many, 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 many people do that. No problem at all. I think, it's highly contextual. There are other programs. I mean, if it's just an FBAR issue, that can be solved in another way through these submission procedures. We could do a separate podcast on that. I'd be careful, though. Okay, the devil is always in the details. I'd be very careful.
Yeah.
And the delinquent information returns, they've had some major changes in how they're administered. I'd be careful with all of this stuff. Anyway, next. Anthony, you were talking about the criminal thing. I have had people call me over the years who were convinced they're criminals.
I know.
Okay, I have never personally, to the best of my knowledge, interacted with a single person for whom this was appropriate. And I'll tell you,
right. Well, no, well, currently, for the old programs, no, I definitely did, and those people that I brought through, it was actually a good deal for them. But I'm trying to imagine the person now.
Anthony, those are not people who will call you. Okay. The very fact that they call you to solve a compliance problem means they're not going to meet the standard of criminal usually. Okay.
Right. Huh?
Anyway, the only point I want to make here is because I have had this experience enough times to want to make the point is that people call up and say, "Oh my God, I haven't complied properly. I want to enter voluntary disclosure." No. Okay. Anyway, move on.
Yeah, no, we don't want to do that, and that's going to be our first move, is not to do that, right? Yeah.
Okay. Next. Well, I guess that's my advice slide. Fixing.
Ooh, well, I think that goes right to where I could direct people. If you're looking for this, thank you, John. Thank you so much for that perfect setup, John. If you are looking for exactly, this is what we do. And I didn't realize that this is what we do. We like to meet with our clients one-on-one and go over their unique situation that does depend on where they live, what their life goals are, where their assets are, what their worldview is, and also getting the family on board too. A lot of times waiting on something, waiting on an immigration attorney, something like that. So if you are looking for that conversation on your best move, because this is probably really a little complicated. I get it. You can go to irsmedic.com/offshore. I am at Thavot and Partners now, but however, IRSMedic is too good of an intellectual property just to let die at the wayside. So we're just still using that now. So go there, select the time to speak with us, and we'll go over a strategy for you, because that's exactly what we're having. We want to have a conversation. All right. Now with that well-placed placement out of the way, Keith, any particular situations you think we've and we did get oh, here we go. By the way, we also want to thank our friend John for doing this as well, and we'll get his information up as well. Keith, your points that you want to make on this here.
Well, I think that, I think the point I want to make is, do not think that the Streamlined program is the panacea to solve all your problems.
Yeah, no, it's
And do not think that it's the go-to thing that you have to do. I kind of, when I talk to my clients, I kind of use the analogy of a Swiss watch. And for that Swiss watch to be fine-tuned, those gears and levers have to come together properly.
Yeah.
And what works for you may not work for another person. Hence, when you were talking about, depends on the country you're living in,
Depends on the country,
the profile, etc. And so don't just jump on the bandwagon without doing your full research. And that's what I do, is I help people explore all of their options. Sometimes they do need to go into the streamline, sometimes not. Sometimes they just need to stay away. But you have to formulate a strategy moving forward.
That's right. And you got to get an objective opinion,
So,
yeah, go ahead, John.
That context, okay.
Yeah.
A lot of times these podcasts make me somewhat uneasy, and this is one of them, actually.
Well, thank you.
Why? Just because there's always this tension between, people who want free information, basically, and
Yes.
and decent advice. Okay. And you can't get decent advice really without going through a process, okay, of sort of disclosure and a conversation with somebody. And I think you usually are not going to get decent advice without, getting many times I've suggested that let's get the tax returns done first, and then we'll decide how to get them into the system, right? Et cetera. But, this does require input from somebody who, unless it's really simple, okay, I think it requires input from, people who actually do this kind of work. Like fixing compliance issues is a very, very different animal from filing tax returns. Okay. Yeah. That's the thing. They're very, very different. So, and this is why, I don't know. I feel a little bit, on the one hand, I think that this probably, if anybody's still listening, has been
surprisingly, a lot of people are still listening, by the way. Okay. No. Yeah. Surprisingly, they love it.
Well, this is just
but you gotta find an advisor you trust, okay, with experience in this particular area. Okay, this is a very narrow technical area that requires knowledge of, I think the Internal Revenue Code. Just even reading penalty provisions, right? There's a huge difference between a penalty may be imposed and a penalty shall be imposed, right? This is, whatever. That's all I have to say today, and I have to go anyway in a minute. So if anybody has any questions or final thoughts, but Keith, I think this has been a good idea. I think it was your initiative to organize this thing.
No, I think it's been well overdue.
I think that the objective today was to alert people to questions they should reasonably ask.
Yes.
Okay.
I think John, I think we did have it successful. I think it is successful because we gave answers, but we also, gave the keep going, keep digging. So I think we did find that balance. Hopefully we did.
Oh, I hope so.
Just things to watch out. And this is really my takeaway on all of this is that, that I think what's happened is if you look at a lot of tax firms, they'll put down that streamlined disclosure as a menu item, like a tax return. And that's the problem. You don't want to think of it like a menu item. If you're thinking of like a menu item, you're thinking of it like it's the all solution for all problems, and it's not. So you want to really, and it's more time thinking about it than doing it is really the strategy that we have to get to that right decision, because there's so many moving parts.
broader sense, I think you've got to address what exactly is it that you're trying to accomplish here. Okay.
I
Yeah.
know, right? Yeah.
Difference
Good
in the
point, John.
standard of compliance for. I mean, if you're looking at renunciation, for example, I mean, the consequences of non-tax compliance and renunciation vary
Exactly. Yeah.
significantly depending
Right.
on circumstances, right?
As opposed to I'm going to be moving back to the U.S. to live. Like, okay, that's different, right? And that's going to impact.
Right.
Generally
Right.
speaking, I think a higher standard of compliance is required generally. But whatever. Anyway,
Well,
great.
let's we're gonna wrap up. Thank you so much. And if you are thinking about renunciation, and all roads lead to renunciation, and I think for a lot of people, like keeping the U.S. citizenship as sort of a luxury item, it has a cost, right? And so if it's something you may not need, you may want to get rid of it. Reach out to John at citizenshipsolutions@proton.mail.com. Also, as Keith was mentioning, he has a lot of clients who he does this concierge level service to give them this advice, this emotional advice about which way to go. He is not a U.S. tax professional, but he's a life professional, and he can help you guide the way around. Keith, thanks so much for joining us. You can reach him at US_overseas_advocate@outlook.com. Keith, you have something to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't tell people what to do. I just present the different options and explore the options, and that in the formulated strategy. That's it.
Yeah, that's the most you can do.
There you go.
And
and
look,
again,
one of the comment I think perhaps should be thrown in. Okay.
Yep.
I think that your listeners should know that tax preparers are governed by something, IRS Circular 230.
230, yeah.
Okay. And it certainly doesn't prevent an honest discussion about the situation, but it does seem to me that it limits, in certain circumstances, what a tax preparer can say to you as well. I mean, I think that factors into the thing in terms of, you're sitting talking to a tax advisor and you're thinking about yourself. Maybe you should think about the tax advisor from time to time. And what are the limitations that are imposed on them, et cetera. But I don't know. Anyway, I'm not a tax preparer, and actually I'm very happy to not be.
You're happy to be one. All right. Thank you, John. Thank you so much. And I am Anthony Parent, host. And if you are if you are looking for that heart-to-heart talk about the best ones for you, again, you can reach out to IRSMedic.com/offshore, schedule a time to speak with us. So with that, I think we'll have another podcast up coming later this week. Are we going to be on later this week? What's our schedule like, guys?
Yeah, on Friday.
On Friday. All right, fantastic. And so, all right. And be sure to subscribe so you know we're going live. We had to go a little bit earlier this morning to fit it all in. So glad to see everybody. So many people could join us. Thanks for watching.